A silent room holds a secret world within the blank edges of a page. Long before printing presses, medieval monks crafted books by hand, but they did far more than just copy words. They encoded entire universes of meaning into the margins, creating a complex maze of symbols and stories. By the end of this exploration, you will see these ancient books not as simple texts, but as sophisticated keys to understanding a lost way of thinking. We will uncover why a doodled rabbit might be a sharp critique of power, and how a grotesque monster could represent a deep theological idea. These margins were a space for secret rebellion, intellectual play, and profound faith, all operating just beside the official text. What does the drive to fill a blank space tell us about the human need to leave a mark? The silence of the scriptorium was a canvas in itself, a space so profound that the scratch of a quill became a significant event. Within these walls, illuminated by shafts of light from high, narrow windows, the monk at his desk was engaged in a sacred ritual. Each movement was deliberate, from the careful preparation of the vellum, made from the skin of a calf or a sheep, to the mixing of vibrant pigments from crushed minerals and plants. This was not mere transcription. It was an act of prayer, a physical embodiment of faith where copying the Word of God was a path to understanding it. A single book, a Psalter or a Bible, could represent an entire year of a monk's life, his labor and devotion permanently inscribed onto the page. This deep, meditative immersion in the text created a unique intellectual environment. The scribe was not a passive machine but an active participant, living with the words day after day. His mind, while focused on the sacred task, would wander, question, and make connections. The margins, those blank spaces surrounding the meticulously penned columns of text, became the natural repository for these thoughts. They were the spillover of a mind deeply engaged, the workshop notes of a theologian and artist combined. The very preciousness of the materials, the sheer investment of time, meant that no part of the page was considered wasted space. Every mark, even the most spontaneous-looking doodle in the margin, was born from this culture of immense significance. And it is with these first, seemingly simple marks that the code of the margins truly begins. Even the simplest mark on a page was a deliberate act. A faint line drawn to test the quill's sharpness, a small circle filled in with ink, a series of loops along the edge of a column of text. To our modern eyes, these might look like nothing more than the absent-minded scribbles of a bored artist, but within the scriptorium, they were something far more significant. These were the foundational gestures, the first layer of the Manuscript Maze. They were a form of visual prayer. Before the scribe began the sacred work of copying the holy words, his hand would often engage in this quiet ritual. Sketching a twisted vine or a geometric knot was a way to focus the mind, to transition from the mundane world into the sacred space of creation. It was a warm-up for the hand and a centering exercise for the spirit, a way to claim the blank space not as emptiness, but as a field for devotion. These spontaneous drawings were deeply personal, a mark of the scribe's presence in a task that was meant to erase individuality, yet they were rarely without meaning. A flower blossoming in the margin was not merely decorative. It could be a silent invocation of the Virgin Mary, a symbol of purity emerging beside a psalm. An intricate, endless knot was not just a pattern. It could represent the complex, unfathomable nature of divine truth, a puzzle for the mind to contemplate. This practice mirrored the textual glosses written between the lines to explain difficult passages. The doodles were a visual gloss, an immediate, emotional response to the text being copied. They were the artist's way of underlining, of saying, "I am here, I am listening." This instinct to fill the void with personal expression set the stage for everything that would follow, transforming the margins from empty borders into a vibrant world waiting to be decoded. From these quiet gestures of devotion, a whole world began to stir in the margins. A lion with a compassionate face, a rabbit clutching a sword, a peacock whose fantail seemed to hold 100 watching eyes. This was the marginal bestiary, a symbolic menagerie that turned the edges of the page into a stage. Every creature was an actor playing a part in a silent, complex drama. The lion, often shown licking its cubs to life, was a direct allegory for Christ resurrecting the souls of the faithful. The peacock, whose flesh was believed to never decay, became a shimmering symbol of immortality and the incorruptible soul. Yet the meanings were never fixed. A rabbit, typically a sign of lustful desire, could also represent the humble soul, fertile with faith, or even the common man, quick to flee from sin. The true genius of these images, however, lay in their subversion. The monks delighted in placing these symbolic animals in scenes of absurdity and humor. A dignified knight, the epitome of earthly power, might be depicted in a losing battle against a giant snail. A monkey, representing human folly, could be dressed in the full robes of a bishop, solemnly performing a mock mass. This was far more than just medieval whimsy. It was a brilliantly safe form of social and religious commentary. By showing a fox, a symbol of cunning and deceit, preaching earnestly to a flock of gullible geese, a scribe could voice a sharp critique of a corrupt local preacher without ever writing a word of direct accusation. The image did the talking, cloaking its message in a layer of plausible deniability. This created a multi-layered conversation with the sacred text at the page center. A psalm about righteousness could be flanked by a scene of a fox leading geese astray, offering a silent, visual warning about false prophets. A theological treatise on the resurrection might be accompanied by that serene, life-giving lion, reinforcing the doctrine in a way that was immediate and memorable. The margins became a dynamic space for intellectual play, where established symbols were twisted and turned to explore new ideas, challenge authority, and reveal the monks' own complex relationship with their faith and their world. But this playful rebellion was not confined to the creatures themselves. It soon began to reshape the very architecture of the page. These bizarre figures lurking in the borders are where the Manuscript Maze reveals its most daring and unsettling layer. Here, the familiar world dissolves into a spectacle of the grotesque and the hybrid. A human body sprouts the head of a bird, a dog's legs extend from a fish torso, and faces peer out from clusters of leaves, their expressions caught between agony and ecstasy. These are not the orderly symbols of the bestiary. They are deliberate violations of nature, creatures born from a fever dream, and their purpose was deeply theological. In a worldview where every element of creation had its ordained place, these impossible beings represented the very concept of the liminal. They existed in the space between categories, on the threshold of the known and the incomprehensible. By drawing a man with a tree for a head, a monk was visually pondering the connection between human life and the natural world, suggesting a unity that transcended simple definitions. A dragon endowed with a sorrowful human face became a powerful image of the internal conflict between base animal instincts and the higher calling of divine reason. These monsters were not just decorations. They were philosophical exercises made visible. They forced the viewer, whether a fellow monk or a noble patron, to confront the limits of their own understanding. If God's creation was orderly, then what was the purpose of imagining such chaos? The answer lies in the margins themselves. By placing these chaotic forms in the blank spaces surrounding sacred text, the artists were creating a visual metaphor for the human mind's attempt to grasp the divine. The central text represented divine order and revealed truth. The chaotic margins represented the messy, confusing, and often frightening process of faith, the struggle to believe in what cannot be easily categorized or explained. The grotesque was a necessary first step toward understanding the sublime. To appreciate the perfect harmony of heaven, one first had to contemplate the twisted complexities of the earthly realm. This intricate dance between order and chaos hints at a final, masterful layer to the maze, one that governed the entire page. This rhythmic dance between text and image was orchestrated with remarkable precision. The monks developed a complete visual language to guide the reader's journey, a system where every flourish and figure served a distinct purpose. Think of a large, ornate letter at the start of a chapter, its curves blossoming into vines that curled down the margin. This was not mere decoration. It was a visual signal as clear as a chapter heading in a modern book, announcing a major shift in the narrative. The scale and complexity of the initial told the reader how important this new section was, preparing the mind for a significant theological argument or the beginning of a sacred story. Further along, a smaller, simpler sketch of a bird or a flower tucked beside a paragraph might mark a subtle but crucial point, a moment for the reader to pause and reflect on a specific idea. This created a unique textual rhythm, a pace set not by words alone but by the very images that framed them. The reader's eye would move from the dense block of text to the open space of the margin, finding rest and interpretation in the drawings that waited there. A particularly difficult passage, perhaps one dealing with divine mystery or moral ambiguity, might be surrounded by a dense cluster of marginalia. This visual noise was a deliberate signal. It told the reader, this part is complex, this part is contested. Pause here and consider the commentary we have provided. The grotesque hybrid or the satirical scene drawn beside such a text was not a random distraction. It was a form of visual footnoting, offering an alternative perspective or an emotional counterpoint to the words on the page. This system transformed the act of reading from a simple left-to-right progression into a dynamic, multi-dimensional exploration. The page became an early form of hypertext centuries before the digital age. A reader could follow a thematic thread not just through the text, but through the linked images in the margins, creating a personal path of understanding. The book was no longer a container for words. It was a unified performance, a symphony where the central text provided the melody and the marginalia created the rich, complex harmony. To appreciate the full genius of this performance, we must look more closely at the tools that made it possible. The vibrancy of a blue sky or the deep crimson of a saint's robe was not a simple artistic choice, but a testament to the physical reality of the scribe's craft. To truly grasp the genius of the Manuscript Maze, we must step into the workshop and examine the humble yet extraordinary tools that brought these worlds to life. The primary instrument was the quill, most often taken from the flight feather of a goose. Each quill had to be carefully cut and shaped with a small knife, a precise act that determined the flow of ink and the character of every line. The ink itself was a complex creation. The most common black ink was made from oak galls, the strange, apple-like growths formed on oak trees by wasps. Crushed and mixed with vitriol, they produced a lasting, deep black. For the most luxurious manuscripts, scribes used pigments ground from semi-precious stones. Ultramarine blue, the color of a deep, clear sky, came from lapis lazuli, a stone mined in distant Afghanistan and worth more than its weight in gold. Vermilion red was made from cinnabar, a toxic mercury ore. The very parchment was a product of immense labor. It was not paper, but the prepared skin of a calf, sheep, or goat, scraped, soaked, and stretched over a frame until it became a smooth, durable surface. A single large Bible might require the skins of more than 200 animals. This material reality imposed its own logic on the art. The high cost of pigments like ultramarine meant that brilliant blue was reserved for the most sacred figures, like the Virgin Mary, making her stand out as a beacon of holiness on the page. A scribe could not simply erase a mistake. Errors were scraped away with a knife, a risky process that could tear the expensive vellum, or they were creatively incorporated into the design, perhaps becoming the body of a strange, marginal monster. Every stroke of the quill was permanent, demanding not just artistic skill but immense patience and forethought. This was not a medium for haste or frivolity. The dazzling image of a dragon battling a knight, which seems so spontaneous, was the result of weeks of meticulous work, each scale painstakingly applied with a hand-cut tool. Understanding this craftsmanship transforms our view of the margins. That playful rabbit is not a casual doodle. It is a deliberate investment, a carefully considered statement painted with materials that were themselves objects of long journeys and complex trade. The monk, surrounded by these humble yet precious tools, was more than a copier. He was an architect of meaning, building worlds one deliberate line at a time. But who were these architects, and what inner world did they carry into their work? Behind the meticulous quill strokes and the layers of symbolic ink lay a distinct human personality. The medieval scribe was a fascinating paradox, a figure bound by the rigid discipline of monastic life, yet exercising a surprising degree of creative freedom within the confines of the page. His primary duty was one of absolute obedience, the faithful transcription of Holy Scripture. But the margins offered a sanctioned space for something else entirely, a channel for his own intellect, his artistic spirit, and even his quiet rebellions. We can think of him as three people in one. He was an artist, pouring his soul into the creation of beauty as an act of devotion. He was a theologian, using visual metaphors to wrestle with complex doctrines that words alone could not fully capture. And he was quite simply a human being, a craftsman who might spend 10 hours a day at a desk, occasionally succumbing to boredom or frustration, and leaving behind a cartoonish face or a doodle that speaks more of weariness than wisdom. Scholars who study these manuscripts often develop a feel for individual scribble hands. One monk might have a consistent style, filling margins with orderly, symbolic beasts that perfectly complement the text, revealing a mind that finds comfort in orthodoxy. Another, however, might populate the same biblical text with scenes of absurdity, where rabbits joust and bishops have the heads of donkeys. This is the fingerprint of a different kind of mind, one that questions and plays, using humor as a sharp tool for commentary. This human element is the final key to understanding the manuscript maze. It was not an impersonal system of symbols decreed from on high. It was a conversation, a record of individual minds engaging with faith, authority, and their own humanity. These monks encoded their very selves into the sacred text, ensuring that a prayer book was also a personal diary. A theological treat is a canvas for wit, and a Holy Bible a testament to the enduring and wonderfully complicated human spirit. Laughter echoes quietly from the edges of these sacred pages, a sound as surprising as it is deliberate. The triumph of a tiny rabbit over a heavily armored knight, or the solemn spectacle of a monkey conducting a mass, these were not signs of a bored artist losing focus. They were sophisticated acts of subversion, cloaked in comedy. Humor provided the monks with a unique and powerful language for commentary, a way to speak truth to power while maintaining a layer of plausible deniability. A fox dressed in the robes of a bishop preaching to a flock of captivated geese was not just a funny picture, it was a sharp, instantly understandable critique of clerical hypocrisy, an accusation that could be made without a single written word of sedition. If ever challenged, the scribe could simply claim it was a harmless jest, a bit of foolishness to lighten the sacred text. This laughter served as a crucial pressure valve within the highly disciplined monastic life. The rules were strict, the hours were long, and the work was painstaking. The margin became a sanctioned space for psychological release, a place where the rigid hierarchy of the monastery and the church could be gently, and sometimes not so gently, mocked. It was a safe outlet for the very human frustrations that must have arisen from a life of obedience, but its purpose ran even deeper. By wrapping complex theological ideas in the accessible cloak of a joke, the monks made them stick in the memory. A dense passage about the dangers of pride became far more impactful when illustrated by a scene of a proud snail being bested by a lowly hedgehog. This practice reveals that medieval faith was not the uniformly grim and severe experience it is sometimes portrayed as. It was a worldview that could comfortably hold joy, irony, and a deeply self-aware intelligence. The ability to laugh at human folly, even within the context of profound devotion, demonstrated a mature and critical faith, one that understood the gap between divine perfection and earthly imperfection. And sometimes this playful critique was aimed at the most profound mysteries of all. A rabbit in full armor brandishing a sword against a knight is more than a whimsical scene. It is a carefully crafted argument. The margins of a medieval manuscript offered a unique form of sanctuary, a place where a monk could wield satire as his weapon. In a world where openly criticizing a bishop or a noble lord could lead to severe punishment, the blank edges of a page became a stage for dissent. By cloaking his critique in the guise of a funny animal cartoon, the scribe enjoyed a powerful shield of plausible deniability. After all, who could take offense at a simple doodle of a fox preaching to a flock of geese? Yet everyone who saw it understood the message. The fox, a traditional symbol of cunning and deceit, dressed in clerical robes, was a direct jab at a corrupt local preacher, a silent accusation of hypocrisy that needed no word. This visual satire often took the form of the world turned upside down, a popular motif where the established social order was completely inverted. Peasants were shown putting kings on trial, or fish were seen catching fishermen with rods and lines. These scenes were not calls for violent revolution. Instead, they served as powerful moral reminders. They illustrated the chaos that ensued when those in power abandoned their God-given responsibilities. By placing this chaotic, topsy-turvy world right beside the solemn words of a psalm praising divine order, the scribe created a jarring contrast. The viewer was forced to hold two ideas at once: the ideal of a just society as described in the sacred text, and the flawed reality of the world just outside the monastery walls. This practice reveals that medieval society was far from monolithic or blindly obedient. It possessed a sophisticated mechanism for internal criticism, using the safe distance of art and allegory to question authority and reflect on its own failings. This critical lens, so sharply focused on the outside world, was eventually turned inward toward the very act of reading and the nature of knowledge itself. This labyrinth was not a trap but a sacred path. The winding, intricate structure of a medieval maze offers the perfect key for understanding how these monks viewed knowledge itself. Unlike a modern puzzle designed to frustrate with dead ends, the classical labyrinth featured a single, convoluted route that inevitably led to the center. This was a profound spiritual metaphor. The journey toward divine truth was understood to be difficult and full of twists, demanding immense patience and faith, but it was not aimless. There was a guaranteed destination for those who persisted. The manuscript page is this metaphor made physical. The central column of text is the primary path, the direct word of God offering clear guidance. But the reader's eye is constantly drawn into the winding vines and looping scenes of the marginalia. These are the contemplative detours, the necessary digressions that enrich the journey. A reader might start with a psalm, but then pause to follow a trail of grotesques down the side of the page, each strange figure posing a silent question about the nature of creation before the path leads back to the scripture. This design encodes a specific theory of knowledge, an epistemology. It argues that true wisdom is not found by rushing in a straight line from point A to point B. Understanding deepens through curiosity, through the willingness to step off the main road and explore the strange thickets of thought found in the margins. Every bizarre hybrid creature and every satirical scene is an invitation to think laterally, to see the central text from a new and unexpected angle. The maze teaches that revelation often comes from the side, from engaging with complexity and paradox. This philosophical framework elevates the doodles from mere decoration to an essential component of the learning process. The journey through the book was meant to mirror the soul's journey toward God, a journey that was intimately tied to the rhythm of the sacred year. The turning of the liturgical year was not merely marked on a calendar, but painted directly onto the page. The books used for daily prayer and Mass were designed to resonate with the specific spiritual season, their marginalia acting as a visual soundtrack to the sacred cycle. As Psalter opened during the summer, expectant weeks of Advent might reveal prophets pointing toward a distant star in the margins, their figures intertwined with barren, wintry vines. The same book, consulted months later during the jubilant Easter season, could display peacocks symbolizing immortality and intricate patterns of unfolding leaves, echoing the theme of resurrection. This was a deliberate form of encoding where time itself was bound into the parchment. A monk reading a prayer in late September, around the time of the feast of Saint Michael, might find the text accompanied by a bustling scene of the harvest in the lower margin, a visual prayer of gratitude that connected his spiritual labor to the agricultural rhythms of the world beyond the monastery walls. This practice transformed the act of reading into a multi-sensory experience. The words spoken, the season felt in the air, and the images seen on the page all harmonized, creating a profound unity between the intellectual world of the text and the lived reality of faith. The manuscript became a living entity, its meaning fluid, changing its emphasis as the year progressed. A grotesque figure drawn beside a Lenten text might be interpreted as a symbol of sin to be overcome, while the same creature next to a Christmas passage could be seen as part of the strange and wondrous creation celebrating the Incarnation. This temporal layer added incredible depth to the manuscript maze. It meant that decoding a marginal image required not just an understanding of symbols, but an awareness of the liturgical moment. The monks who created and used these books were weaving their spiritual lives into the very fabric of their most precious objects, ensuring that every reading was a unique encounter, perfectly timed to the season of the soul. A lily unfolding in the margin was never just a flower. It was a silent sermon on purity, its white petals a direct echo of the Virgin Mary's innocence. Beside it, a humble violet nestling among the text's roots spoke of modesty, while a strawberry plant, with its triple-lobed leaves and red fruit, could symbolize the Holy Trinity or the righteous fruits of a virtuous life. This was the secret language of Flora, a visual vocabulary where every leaf and petal carried profound meaning. The monks who painted these botanical details were creating a living glossary of faith, transforming the margins into a symbolic garden for contemplation. A twisting vine that carefully encircled a passage about faith was a clear illustration of how believers were connected to Christ, the true vine. Conversely, a thistle's sharp prickles drawn beside a moral warning served as a stark reminder of sin's painful consequences. This botanical code allowed for a layered reading of the text, where a single image could reinforce, explain, or even challenge the words it bordered. The remarkable accuracy of many drawings, from the veining on an oak leaf to the specific shape of a clover, suggests that these artists were not working from memory alone. They were keen observers of the natural world, likely tending herb gardens within the monastery walls where they could study the living models for their art. This practice reveals a beautiful synthesis of empirical observation and spiritual interpretation. The monk saw a real plant, but he also saw the divine idea it represented, believing that God's creation was a book to be read just as carefully as the scriptures. By encoding this reverence for nature into the parchment, they were mapping the entire cosmos, from the smallest flower to the grandest celestial sphere, onto the page. The cosmos itself was charted in the corners of a prayer book. Alongside saints and grotesques, monks meticulously drew concentric circles representing the celestial spheres, each ring inscribed with the name of a planet. They sketched the 12 signs of the zodiac, from the ram of Aries to the fishes of Pisces, and personified the 4 winds as figures puffing their cheeks to blow across the parchment. These were not diagrams for navigation or astronomical calculation. They were spiritual maps designed to show the reader their precise place within a vast, divinely orchestrated hierarchy. The Earth, understood as the center of this universe, was often depicted as a small circle at the very heart of these diagrams, surrounded by the nested spheres of the moon, the sun, and the planets, all contained within the outermost sphere of the fixed stars and the primum mobile, the prime mover set in motion by God himself. By placing this cosmic map in the margin of a Psalter or a Bible, the scribe was making a profound argument about the nature of knowledge. He was asserting that to understand a single line of scripture, one must also understand the grand architecture of creation in which that scripture was revealed. The theological text and the cosmological diagram were 2 sides of the same coin, both necessary to comprehend the full glory of God. This practice reveals a medieval worldview that was beautifully, fundamentally holistic. There was no sharp division between science and religion, between the study of nature and the study of the divine. Observing the orderly paths of the planets was another way of reading the mind of God, a form of devotion as valid as copying a gospel. The page became a microcosm, a miniature universe where the word, the image, and the cosmic order coexisted in perfect harmony. This encoding of the heavens onto parchment was also a powerful memory tool, transforming the book into a mental cathedral where every detail was part of a larger, unforgettable whole. A grotesque dragon battling an angel was not merely a dramatic spectacle. It was a mental hook designed to snag a complex theological concept and anchor it firmly in the mind. In a world where a single book was a rare and precious object, the ability to remember its contents was a form of intellectual power. The monks who created these manuscripts were masters of the art of memory, and the margins were their primary training ground. They understood a fundamental principle of cognition, that the human brain is wired to remember pictures, especially strange, emotional, or narrative-driven images, far more readily than it recalls abstract words. So, when a scribe needed to memorize a long list of the 7 deadly sins, he did not simply repeat the words, he painted them. Gluttony became a fat man greedily consuming a feast, sloth a figure sleeping through a church service, and envy a gaunt face glaring with bitter resentment. These vivid caricatures transformed an abstract moral checklist into an unforgettable gallery of human folly. The placement of these images was just as crucial as their content. A scene of the Last Judgment might always appear in the lower margin of a book of prayers for the dead. A specific saint, like Saint Christopher, could be consistently depicted wading through a river near texts about journeys or safe passage. This created a spatial map on the parchment, a memory palace in miniature. A monk recalling a particular prayer would not just remember the words, he would remember its location on the page, visualizing the specific monster, flower, or scene that lived beside it. The book itself became a cognitive architecture. This practice reveals that these illuminated manuscripts were not passive containers of information. They were interactive technologies for enhancing thought. Turning a page was like walking through the rooms of a mental cathedral, each corner and archway holding a specific idea, perfectly filed away for later retrieval. This deep connection between image, space, and memory feels strikingly modern, echoing the way we use visual icons and spatial layouts on our digital screens to navigate vast stores of information. The medieval monk, using a painted rabbit to remember a psalm, was engaging in a form of cognitive technology that we are only now rediscovering in our own information-saturated age. This digital echo across 1,000 years is no mere coincidence. The same cognitive architecture that guided a monk's hand now shapes our screens. Consider the hyperlink, that fundamental unit of the internet. It allows us to jump from one idea to another with a single click, creating a personal and non-linear path through information. This is precisely the function of the marginal grotesque or the symbolic flower. A reader in the 14th century, encountering a dragon drawn beside a passage on sin, would pause and follow that visual thread, connecting the text to a whole network of moral teachings about temptation. The dragon was a hyperlink, an invitation to dive deeper. Our modern emojis and reaction GIF are the direct descendants of the medieval bestiary. We send a fox emoji to signify cunning, or a lion to represent strength, compressing complex emotions and ideas into a single, instantly recognizable symbol, just as a monk used a peacock to convey the entire concept of immortality. This is not the dumbing down of language, but a return to a more ancient, visually driven form of communication. The medieval manuscript, with its central text and branching marginalia, was a physical hypertext system, a web of meaning crafted from vellum and ink. Recognizing this continuity reframes our entire view of the so-called Dark Ages. It was not a period of intellectual stagnation waiting for the Renaissance to awaken it. It was an era of profound innovation in information design, where thinkers developed sophisticated methods for organizing, storing, and retrieving knowledge visually. Their maze was a solution to the problem of complexity, a challenge we still grapple with today. To see the full brilliance of their solution, we need to step inside a specific, legendary book. The Luttrell Psalter does not simply have marginalia. Its margins contain an entire world. Created in Lincolnshire, England, during the first half of the 14th century for a wealthy landowner named Sir Geoffrey Luttrell, this book explodes the boundaries of the Manuscript Maze. While it contains the expected psalms and prayers, its lower margins are a breathtakingly detailed panorama of the 14th century English countryside. Here, the sacred text is framed by the profoundly secular, a continuous frieze of farmers plowing fields with oxen, women baking bread in communal ovens, and knights jousting in tournaments. This is not a random collection of scenes. It is a deliberate, comprehensive encoding of the entire social and economic world that supported Sir Geoffrey's power and piety. The act of ploughing, depicted with such careful attention to the harnesses and the gait of the animals, is presented as an act worthy of a place beside the Psalms. It argues that the labor of the peasant is part of the divine order, that God's presence is as much in the sweat of the field as in the chant of the monastery. The Psalter becomes a stunningly ambitious project, an attempt to capture the whole of creation from the highest angel to the lowliest plowman within the borders of a single book. This is encoding on a monumental scale where the mundane is sanctified and the entire structure of medieval society is presented as a harmonious, God-given whole. Yet, even within this harmonious vision, the familiar spirit of subversion peeks through. Among the diligent laborers, we find scenes of pure comedy, a woman whacking a thief over the head with her distaff, or a grotesque hybrid creature playing the bagpipes. The Luttrell Psalter shows us the manuscript maze at its most expansive and complex, where symbolism, daily life, and satire coexist on a single, magnificent page, creating a tapestry of meaning so rich that we are still unraveling its threads today. Yet for all our careful decoding, a stubborn silence remains at the heart of certain pages. Look closely at a particular pattern of intertwined lines that seems to lead nowhere, or a creature so abstract it defies classification. We can analyze its form, its placement, its historical context, and still be left with a fundamental question. What does it mean? The honest answer, in many cases, is that we simply do not know. Some of these marks were likely inside jokes, visual puns understood only by the small community of monks within a single scriptorium. A doodle of a specific kind of bird might have been a playful reference to a fellow scribe with a distinctive nose. A seemingly random arrangement of dots could have been a personal memory aid, a system of notation so private that its key died with its creator. This ambiguity is not a failure of scholarship. It is a vital feature of the manuscript maze. It forces us to acknowledge the limits of our interpretation, to recognize that we are eavesdropping on a conversation from 1,000 years ago, and sometimes we only catch the murmur, not the words. The presence of these unbreakable codes is a poignant reminder of the humanity of the scribes. They were not just anonymous craftsmen producing symbols from a universal dictionary. They were individuals with private thoughts, inside jokes, and personal devotional practices that they embedded into their work. If we could explain every single mark with absolute certainty, we would risk turning these vibrant, living documents into sterile specimens, their creators reduced to predictable formulas. The mystery preserves their individuality. It invites us to sit with the unknown, to accept that the past will always hold a part of itself back, and that some secrets are meant to be pondered, not solved. This enduring enigma is precisely what makes the study so endlessly compelling, a puzzle that can never be fully completed. And now, the very tools we use to probe these secrets are opening up entirely new dimensions of the maze. A ghost lies beneath the surface of the page, a faint drawing erased centuries ago. For most of history, these spectral layers were invisible, lost to time and the scribe's own knife. But the 21st century has handed us a new kind of sight. Technologies like multispectral imaging are now illuminating the deepest recesses of the manuscript maze, revealing a hidden world of creative struggle and revision. By photographing a page under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared, scientists can detect the chemical ghost of iron gall ink that has faded from view or was scraped away. What appears to the naked eye as a pristine, finished illustration of a saint might, under this new light, reveal the hesitant first strokes of the artist's hand, a different pose altogether that was abandoned and corrected. We are no longer just looking at the final performance. We are being given a backstage pass to the rehearsal, watching the artist think in real time, 1,000 years after the fact. This is most dramatically seen in palimpsests, manuscripts where the original text was scraped or washed off so the precious vellum could be reused. To the medieval eye, this was simple pragmatism. To our enhanced vision, it is a historical treasure trove. A prayer book from the 12th century might conceal a fragment of a lost Roman legal text or an early Greek scientific treatise beneath its surface, two worlds layered onto a single skin. With these tools, we can begin to trace the path of a single idea. We can see where a monk decided a grotesque monster was too distracting and painted over it with a simple floral border, or where a complex theological symbol was simplified for clarity. Every change of heart, every correction, becomes a data point in understanding the intellectual priorities of the scriptorium. High-resolution digital photography complements this by making these fragile documents accessible in ways previously unimaginable. A scholar in Tokyo can zoom in on the brushwork of a marginal rabbit in an English manuscript with a clarity greater than someone holding the book in a library vault. This global, collaborative examination is uncovering patterns we never knew to look for, like the distinct way a particular monastery drew the folds of a cloak or the leaves of a tree. The maze is not becoming simpler with these discoveries. It is expanding, growing more intricate and more human. We are not just seeing what the monks wanted us to see. We are seeing them at work, making mistakes, changing their minds, and striving for perfection. This technological lens transforms the manuscript from a static object into a dynamic record of thought, inviting us to ask not just what the images mean, but why they were made that way in the first place. This breathtaking beauty was a deliberate theological argument. The monks who painted these intricate worlds believed that physical splendor was a direct reflection of divine perfection. To craft something beautiful was to participate in the very act of creation, to offer a tangible echo of God's own work. The complex harmony of the page, the careful balance between the orderly text and the chaotic margins, was itself a statement of faith. It argued that the universe, for all its apparent strangeness and occasional absurdity, was fundamentally good and ordered by a loving intelligence. Even the most bizarre grotesque, when placed within the overall design, played its part in this cosmic symphony. The immense labor involved, the years spent perfecting a single book, was never seen as a waste. It was an act of love, a form of prayer rendered in pigment and gold. This stands in stark contrast to our modern, utilitarian view of information, where content is often stripped of form for the sake of speed and efficiency. For the medieval mind, the beautiful container was essential to the sacred message it held. The shimmering colors, the gleaming gold leaf, the flowing script, all were designed to do more than just inform. They were meant to elevate. The very act of looking at such a page was intended to be a spiritual exercise, lifting the reader's mind from the mundane world toward the contemplation of heavenly truths. It was a bridge between the earthly and the divine, built with nothing more than patience, skill, and an unwavering belief that beauty itself is a path to understanding. That same restless hand moves today, tracing patterns on a foggy window or sketching in the margins of a meeting agenda. The medieval monk meticulously illuminating a sacred text and the modern student doodling a cartoon next to their lecture notes are united by a profound and ancient human instinct. We are compelled to fill the void. A blank space is not an emptiness to be respected, but an invitation to be accepted. It is a canvas for our presence, a demand for our personal mark. The medieval manuscript maze is not an anomaly. It is the grand, elaborate masterpiece of this very impulse, a cathedral built from the same creative urge that leads us to personalize our phone cases or decorate the borders of a to-do list. This is the drive to transform a passive experience into an active one. Reading a printed textbook is a one-way transaction. but drawing a light bulb next to a complex idea makes it your own. The monk was doing the same, using his quill to converse with the scripture, to question it, to emphasize a point, or to simply remind himself that he was there, a living mind engaged with timeless words. This shared behavior reveals a continuity of mind that transcends centuries. It suggests that our cognitive wiring craves this kind of multi-layered engagement. We are not designed to be passive receivers of information. We are annotators by nature, seeking to connect new knowledge to our existing web of thoughts through a visual, often playful shorthand. The monk's grotesque monster and our hastily drawn emoji serve an identical purpose, compressing a complex feeling or idea into a simple, memorable glyph. Recognizing this bridge between the scriptorium and the classroom demystifies the past. It allows us to see the medieval scribe not as a remote, austere figure, but as a person grappling with the same fundamental need to personalize his world, to inject his humanity into a standardized format. The tools have evolved from a goose quill and oak gall ink to a ballpoint pen or a digital stylus, but the intention remains unchanged. We are all, in our own ways, encoding our worlds into the margins. And this realization forces a question about our own blank spaces. In an age of digital screens and fleeting content, where are our margins, and what are we choosing to draw within them? Our digital age prizes speed, but the Manuscript Maze champions a different virtue entirely: depth. In a world of endless scrolling and fragmented notifications, these ancient pages present a radical alternative, a model of engagement built on patience and layered meaning. The margins were not a distraction from the central text, they were its necessary complement, an enrichment that demanded the reader slow down, wander, and ponder. This stands in stark contrast to our current habits of skimming headlines and consuming information in bite-sized chunks designed for quick digestion. The medieval book was not meant to be read fast. It was an object to be lived with, a companion for contemplation where a single page could offer an afternoon's worth of reflection. The maze challenges our assumption that more information delivered faster is always better. It asks us to consider the quality of our attention. What if our digital spaces were designed not to capture our focus for a few seconds, but to hold it for a meaningful hour? Could a website or an application incorporate deliberate pauses, visual echoes, and branching paths of thought that mimic the contemplative structure of a manuscript page? The monk's practice is a call to think about information architecture not as a delivery system, but as an environment for thought. Their legacy is not a set of symbols to be decoded, but an invitation to reconsider how we build our own intellectual worlds. It urges us to ask what we might be missing in our rush to consume, and how we can carve out our own margins, even in the busiest of digital landscapes, for a slower, richer kind of understanding. A single careless touch can erase a message that has survived for 1,000 years. The survival of these manuscript mazes is a fragile miracle, a constant battle waged in the quiet, climate-controlled rooms of modern conservation labs. Here, the enemies are relentless and invisible, a slow-moving siege of light that fades brilliant blues to pale gray, of humidity that encourages microscopic mold to feast on ancient collagen, of acidic air that turns supple vellum as brittle as autumn leaves. The conservator's work is a form of extreme patience, a discipline that mirrors the monk's own meticulous craft. Using tools as fine as a surgeon's scalpel, they work to stabilize a torn edge of parchment with a nearly invisible Japanese tissue paper adhesive. They might gently humidify a page that has cockled and warped over centuries, coaxing it back to flatness under gentle weights. Every action is reversible, every decision weighed with the knowledge that they are not the owners of this treasure. but its temporary guardians in a chain of custody stretching back to the scriptorium itself. This is a modern form of devotion, a silent vow to protect a unique window into the human past. The challenge is profound, balancing the need for preservation with the imperative for access. A book locked away in a vault is safe, but it is also silenced. The goal is to stabilize these objects so that scholars can study their secrets and digital cameras can capture their every detail for a global audience, all while minimizing the wear and tear that even careful handling inevitably causes. Supporting the work of libraries and conservation institutes is not merely about maintaining artifacts. It is about actively participating in the preservation of a shared human inheritance, ensuring that the labyrinth remains open for exploration by generations yet to come. These silent messages, encoded with such care, have endured through wars, plagues, and the slow erosion of centuries. Their continued survival now depends on our own willingness to become links in that ancient chain, to ensure the maze does not crumble into dust before its final secrets are understood. The margins of a medieval manuscript were never truly blank. They were a vibrant, complex world, a testament to the enduring power of creativity itself. The Manuscript Maze is far more than a historical curiosity. It is a profound record of the human need to find and make meaning in our surroundings, to leave a personal mark on a seemingly impersonal world. By learning to read this visual language, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of the Middle Ages, one that shatters the myth of a dark and unthinking era. We see instead a period of incredible intellectual play, deep faith, and a surprisingly modern impulse to annotate, to question, and to connect. The next time your own gaze falls upon a blank margin, whether on a page or a screen, remember the monks. They saw that emptiness not as a void to be ignored, but as a canvas for a universe of possibility, a silent invitation to encode an entire world. I encourage you to accept that invitation. Explore the digital archives of libraries like the British Library or the Morgan Library, where high-resolution scans of these manuscripts are freely available. Zoom in on the details, follow a twisting vine, stare into the face of a grotesque. You might be surprised by the connection you feel across the centuries, a spark of recognition at that shared, innate drive to create. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the labyrinth. If you enjoyed unraveling these mysteries, please subscribe for more explorations into the hidden corners of